Hello and welcome to episode 277 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Hello, Ian. How's it going?
It's going well. The storms have passed. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. The sun has come out and the week is ambling on towards the weekend, which is when the exciting stuff begins. But you are back in front of the microphone, back from behind a bagel, I assume?
Couple bagels.
Or some poutine, maybe?
Yeah, I hear Montreal is famous for both of those things. I think the bagels are pretty good. The poutine's very good. But had a nice little weekend extended getaway in Montreal where it was also blisteringly hot. And the French influence of, we don't really need air conditioning was a little unfortunate for the most part. But it was a nice weekend.
Well, that's good. And welcome back. I'm glad you had a nice time. And that's what I always do when I think of places to go. When it's very hot, I want to go to places without air conditioning.
Yeah, I've only ever been to Montreal during heat waves. I really got to cut that out, maybe go in February or something. But yeah, I'm just happy I got there and back without any major issues, because if you've been paying attention to air travel in the Northeast or really anywhere east of the Mississippi in the last week, it's kind of been a hellscape of flight delays, cancellations, diversions, tornadoes, and all sorts of stuff. I got extremely lucky. No major issues in either direction. Actually, we were early in both directions, but it was one of those situations on the way there, our flight was delayed because of operational issues, not actually because of weather. And the earlier flight, 2 hours earlier than mine, was also delayed because of operational issues by 2 hours. So I said, why don't I just hop on that flight? I'll get where I'm going before I was even supposed to land on my original flight. And that turned out to be great. And on the return flight, miraculously, we took off from Montreal and just made a straight line south to New York. That doesn't really happen in the summer. And we landed early, and it was kind of just miraculous. It was so seamless, and I think I cashed in a lot of travel karma this week.
Well, hopefully you have some of it banked up for later in the year.
I hope so.
That was Jason's plan for last weekend. This weekend, I don't know what he has planned. But if you're in the UK, the Royal International Air Tattoo is this weekend. So if you're going to be there, shoot us a message, podcast@fr24.com, and we'll put you in touch with my colleague, Chris, who will be at Riot for the weekend. And then next weekend is Farnborough, which is one of two really, I guess, major air shows. And then you kind of have the secondary Dubai and Singapore. But as far as commercial things go, Farnborough and then Paris, obviously in the odd years, is the big one. And Farnborough is beginning next week. We'll have a presence there as well. And we'll do our standard orders and information wrap-up show after all that good stuff happens at Farnborough. And then the week after is Oshkosh. And I've mentioned in the past few weeks, and I'll mention it again, I will be up there on the 27th of July. So if you're going to be around, emails, podcast@fr24.com, and we'll get a meetup together. There's a few of us that are going to meet up in the afternoon, but feel free to drop a line and say hi if you're going to be up there.
So much stuff going on.
It's the busiest weeks of summer. And I should probably also mention, by the time the podcast comes out, it's entirely possible that we will have set another all-time flight tracking record. The third Thursday in July, which happens to be yesterday, if you're listening to the podcast on Friday, that is usually, over the past couple of years, the highest number of total flights for the year. So last year we topped 263,000, that is. This year we've gone over that a handful of times already. It's not outside the realm of possibility that we will track 300,000 total flights on a single day this year. So we'll keep an eye on that and report back next week and see what we can see.
All right.
While Jason was enjoying Montreal, I was sitting in my basement while the tornado sirens were going off.
And I was watching on my phone going, that's just a bad day for not just O'Hare as usual, but also the little sister airport on the south side of town. I think Midway got in on the action too, which you don't hear much about Midway.
Not anymore. Formerly the world's busiest airport and the world's busiest square mile. You now don't hear much about Southwest's northern hub, dare I say. But both Chicago airports, O'Hare and Midway, reported tornadoes on or very near the airfield.
Which you don't want. That's bad.
You certainly don't.
For everything.
The Midway METAR, if you copy it and paste it into a document, is nearly 4 lines long and includes remarks such as tornado, 5 miles southwest of the airfield, moving east, and a tornado. And that's a new one for me. I don't think I've ever seen tornado listed in the METAR itself.
And I think at one point, the FAA's air traffic management system, or the delay reporting system, just reported the condition at both O'Hare and Midway as tornado/hurricane, which I think at any given moment, it could have been either. So you might as well just say both.
The weather was bad enough.
You had firsthand experience. Was it really that bad?
So the funny thing is my house is due east of the airport, due east of O'Hare. And I'm located in between runway 27 center and 27 right. So I'm on the north side of the airfield. And by the time it got to us, it had calmed remarkably. And the weather on Sunday night was actually much worse at my house than it was on Monday night when all of the tornado sirens are going off and everything. So, I mean, I'm not going to say I was disappointed because I'm glad, we did no damage or anything like that. But it was kind of a letdown.
I'm sorry your house didn't blow away, Ian. You can't have it all.
But this is not to talk about weather. I mean, it is. But the thing that I wanted to bring up here is the fact that a lot of people asked, well, what do they do at the airport when there's a tornado? And obviously for the folks in the actual airport itself, in the terminal buildings or the air traffic controllers in the tower, they evacuate. They go down into the basement area at O'Hare. And like nearly every airport in the world now, there's a collection of tunnels that people can go into. You may have seen pictures in the past of the rather famous tunnel that has the art installation and is always playing Rhapsody in Blue between the Concourse B and C in Terminal 1, which is home to United, and other places. But the question then came, where do they do if they're on the airplane? If they're already pushed back from the gate waiting to take off when a tornado comes through? And one pilot's answer was, there is no plan.
You put the parking brakes on and hope you don't move much, I guess, is probably the plan. And this is something I did want to talk about too. So I think there was a confirmed tornado less than 2 miles east of O'Hare, which is frighteningly close. And thankfully it wasn't any closer than that. But a lot of people said on the social medias, as they tend to, they react to things without the knowledge needed to actually add any constructive thoughts. I know it happens. I've been known to do it myself. Heavy accusation, but it's true. And a lot of people saying it. How could the airlines not have canceled these flights? How could they have let these flights go during a tornado warning? And well, none of it really works that way. Airlines don't cancel flights for a small weather front like this. They'll proactively trim flight schedules for a hurricane or a major storm front that'll impact for the entire day, something you can predict that will impact your operations for an entire day. A storm front like this that's going to maybe roll through during a pretty short window, a period of time. The storm isn't exactly long lasting. It probably only impacted the airport for 30 minutes, maybe? It was pretty fast moving.
It impacted the actual airport for, just under an hour. And then departures were stopped in total for about 2 hours.
Right. So this isn't like a hurricane or any sort of other major storm that you can predict exactly when it's going to hit. You just know that there's going to be weather sometime during that day. And airlines will issue weather waivers saying, hey, if you have some flexibility, maybe fly tomorrow or the day before your scheduled flight. And a tornado warning is only issued when a tornado is confirmed to be on the ground, either by radar signature or someone literally on the ground using their eyes going, hey, there's a tornado over there. And by that time, there's nothing for an airline to do. They can't magically recall all of their flights and get them back to a gate and get all those passengers off. That takes forever. It probably took all night to get all of those flights that were out on the ramp that eventually had their flight crews timed out to get back, not just to the apron, but actually back to a gate and get those passengers off. There were probably dozens and dozens and dozens of canceled flights that night. But this isn't really the kind of thing that an airline can easily plan around, and you can't plan around the exact severity of this storm. It could have very easily have been that there was a major storm at Midway, but it totally missed O'Hare. And you can't predict that. So it's not fair to say airlines should have canceled flights, or how could they have flights out there during a tornado warning? Well, tornado warnings only last for a few minutes, and it's a warning because you don't know it's happening until it's happening, and then it becomes a warning. So maybe they meant a tornado watch. They should have canceled more flights during a tornado watch, but then you'd be canceling a lot more flights a lot more often throughout the summer. And I don't think passengers would be too happy about that either.
No, I mean, it's one of those situations. And like I said, where I am, looking at the radar signature, it kind of, if you open both of your arms and then slowly close them, it kind of made a hollow space where there was no precipitation and the wind was very calm right around the airport and towards the lake. So it was one of those things where it was a very small portion of the front actually passed over the airport. It just so happened that that small portion of the front spawned at least one tornado. And this goes to talking out of school here is I don't know how an airplane, like a fully loaded airplane, would respond to a tornado. And if anyone has any information or has seen any research on that,
I don't know if there are any models on this kind of thing.
I would love to see. And a cursory Google search returned nothing valuable as far as believable information. So I'm interested to know, like, what would happen. I mean, obviously the bigger danger is debris within the tornado impacting the air, like not what's actually going to happen to the aircraft. But part of me is still very curious to see what would happen.
Yeah, out on the airport, I mean, O'Hare is a huge plot of land. There's not going to be a ton of debris flying around, but there will be stuff if the tornado is big enough. But a part of my brain can't reconcile, like, a tornado passing over the airfield. If it hits an aircraft, like, it's either going to do nothing, maybe spin it around a little bit, or it's going to create enough lift to make the airplane go in the air. Honestly, I can't reconcile that in my head. Like, what would happen? And I feel like this is something that could easily be modeled with the proper software and computer. If you possess both of those things, maybe run that and let us know.
That would be amazing. All right, let's move on. Hey, good news for Boeing.
Impossible.
No, it's not impossible. There's actually good news for Boeing.
What is it?
Boeing has begun 777-9 certification flight testing. The FAA has granted Boeing type inspection authorization. TIA is the big step towards actually certifying the aircraft. Type inspection authorization means that the FAA believes that the aircraft is able to be certified. And now they move towards proving that in real life. The FAA is satisfied that Boeing has done its homework. They're satisfied that the changes that Boeing implemented to some of the mechanical parts of the aircraft and the explanation that they gave the FAA regarding all the software on the aircraft is ready to go. And now the FAA inspectors just need to be on the airplane while it's flying. And eventually, probably about 18 months from now, they'll say, okay, here's your type certification. And then begins the long road to delivering the aircraft to commercial customers. But let's just stick with the good news for now.
Yeah. The aircraft, the 777-9 that is doing this flight testing, it flew 4.5 years ago for the first time. So that's pretty notable that it's taken that long to get from the first flight to actual certification flight testing. But yeah, that is a major hurdle overcome. But yeah, it's been a minute, but it's been exactly one pandemic and then some. But wow, it's long overdue, but I'm sure there's some much needed relief and I don't know if celebration in wherever it is Boeing is headquartered these days, but good news nonetheless.
I mean, there's definitely, I would say, cause for celebration. I mean, this is a major milestone in the certification of an aircraft or the certification process of an aircraft. So I think, kudos to the team that's been working hard on this. And at least at this point, we're not likely to see further big stretches where they go, oh, you know what? No, we're going to need another 18 months. We're going to need another year. We're going to need, this is a big thing. They've got inspectors on board, and now it's time to fly the plane and make sure it's the plane that they designed.
And maybe even the 737-7 and 10 will join the flight testing party at some point.
Jason, let's not get ahead of ourselves.
I mean, I'd like to get a little ahead because these are 737s. They shouldn't be that complicated. And if I'm an airline, I really, really want those. But maybe I won't get too ahead of myself. That's the next party. It's like having your birthday and Christmas too close to each other. You don't want to combine celebrations. You want to spread them out. So you get the gifts, spread out, and you get multiple gifts. You don't want to combine. So maybe in 6 months from now, they can have another celebration.
There you go. Sure, we'll go.
Yep, that all made sense.
Let's shift gears entirely and talk about what happened in Russia last week, which is the crash of a Gazpromavia Superjet outside of Moscow. This aircraft was coming out of maintenance. It had just received heavy maintenance and was flying for the first time when it crashed, killing all 3 crew members who were on board. We did not track this aircraft with ADS-B, but we did receive Mode S frames from the aircraft, which indicated no positions, but did provide altitude, and the aircraft calculated vertical rate, which is reported as part of the Mode S data, both of which indicated a climb to 5,000 feet and then a precipitous descent into what we now know to be a mountainous wooded area outside of Moscow. Russia is investigating the crash, and they have recovered both the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder, and they say that they have downloaded the data from both of those recorders and are now in the process of analyzing that data.
Yeah, initial reports had said that this was one of the Russified versions of the aircraft, I guess.
The Superjet new.
Superjet new, which
is not true.
Yeah, not true. Thankfully, I mean, maybe not thankfully, but I guess it is thankfully for Russia that program is probably not impacted by this, but terrible tragedy. Yet another whole loss of the SSJ. I guess this is the third?
I think
whole loss? Is it the fourth? There was the initial one. I think that was in South America during flight testing and during the media flight. There was the Aeroflot one that belly flopped on the runway, and then there was this one. Was there a fourth?
Demonstration in Indonesia into the mountains.
Indonesia, thank you, not South America.
There was the one in Russia where it experienced a runway excursion in 2018. There was the fire in Moscow. That was the one that we discussed thoroughly and where it was captured on video. And then the one where it went off the runway way back in 2018 in, I believe, Yakutsk. Right. So actually, this is the fifth. I'm sorry.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So we will wait to see what the Russian investigation has to say. Thankfully, like you said, Ian, they recovered the boxes from this aircraft and they were able to be read out. And we'll just wait to see what they have to say.
Yeah.
Not much international implication here because I don't think there are really any SSJs flying outside of Russia at this point, or outside of any Russian airlines. At least.
Right. They're still active outside Russia, but not
by any non-Russian airlines. This would have been a much bigger concern back in the day where you had Interjet and CityJet operating the SSJ, but those days are well behind us.
Yeah. The French BEA, the accident investigators in France, have released their final report on an AirHub Airlines A320, which descended very, very low in Paris based on a bad altimeter setting. They were given the wrong altimeter setting by the air traffic controllers, and that led them to believe that they were higher than they were. We previously discussed this, but the final report does a really good job of layering all of the things that went wrong beyond the bad QNH. They were given a QNH of 1011 hectopascals rather than 1001. And that made them think that they were 280 feet higher than they actually were. And so when they got to the ground or near the ground and they were flying in instrument conditions, they did not see the runway by what they thought was decision height and conducted a go around. Well, what they thought was their decision height was actually 6 feet above the ground, nearly a mile ahead of the runway.
So to put that in perspective, if I was standing out in the field, I would have been hit in the head by this aircraft nearly a mile away from the runway. Wow.
So that part we knew. We knew that the aircraft had gotten far too low. But what's interesting is kind of the readout of how this happened and what went wrong. Because one of the things that the investigators note is that this happened because they weren't using an ILS approach. They were using a separate precision approach, which uses the altimeter settings and then leaves the pilots without that vertical guidance outside of the altimeter settings. So thinking that they were on the correct vertical profile, just much lower than they actually were. And one of the other contributing factors that the BEA notes is that the runway lights were not turned on.
And their wipers were on high as they were in rain. They had a lot going against them here.
Yes. And so there was, kind of multiple things that go into this. The other thing is you would think that, oh, hey, why didn't they receive a terrain warning? And the report does a really good job of showing basically they weren't low enough, far enough away from the airport. Because they were on a stabilized approach, they were just too low on the approach. The way the terrain profile warning system works on this particular A320 is they weren't low enough, far enough away from the runway to trigger a terrain warning. It did trigger a terrain warning in the control tower, but the control tower took too long and used
9
seconds, and used improper phraseology to inquire what was happening with the aircraft. And they note multiple times that the tower couldn't actually see the aircraft. So again, one of those things where it's never just one, it wasn't just the wrong QNH, because they never corrected the QNH. But with the runway lights on, the aircraft was able to establish a visual reference and land safely.
Yeah, apparently it took the controllers 9 seconds after the alert was issued to warn the crew. And unfortunately, apparently the crew didn't hear that call and continued to descend below to that very, very scary 6 feet above ground level, which thankfully there wasn't so much as like a light pole on the ground. They miraculously didn't hit anything. That's a hell of a runway safety area, I guess. Wouldn't expect there to be that much empty space around de Gaulle, but I guess there is.
Thankfully, it's all farmland.
Yeah. Thankfully, they weren't growing any like corn out there, because corn can get over 6 feet tall. I don't know.
That's true.
That's true. Fun fact for you. But there's some other interesting information that neither the aircraft nor the air traffic controller's tools are designed to detect this type of error, which would be the incorrect QNH setting. So there's really nothing to prevent this from happening again. And the only thing that prevented this flight from actually impacting the ground was that the crew, thankfully, miraculously, at 6 feet above ground level, determined, oh, we can't see the runway and we're too close to the runway, so we're going to go around now because we don't have visual confirmation of the runway, so we're going to initiate a go around. They didn't actually know how low they were. They just got insanely lucky, let's go with. Is that the right way to phrase it?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. That's scary. That's really scary. But thankfully, on the second approach, which was also carried out with the same incorrect QNH setting, they were able to land because of other factors. The runway lights were on, and that they had visual contact with the runway, and they were able to land without any issue. But man, was this close to being a very, very different story, and I feel like we say that a lot.
We do say that a lot, but thankfully, this is the story. We'll put a link to the final report in the show notes. We'll also call out the separate report summary that includes the safety recommendations, because that gets into the difference between ILS approaches and Baro VNAV approaches and
stuff's complicated.
Why that matters. So I went down a rabbit hole on this. Thank you for coming along, and we'll leave it there unless you want more information, in which case definitely read the final report.
You can call Ian anytime and he'll tell you all about it.
You can. Absolutely.
If you find his phone number, go for
it. Southwest pilots were already in a bit of hot water because they took off on a closed runway. But this week we learned something that, to be perfectly honest, if you've listened to the podcast a few times and heard us talk about NOTAMs, isn't entirely surprising, but concerning nonetheless.
Yeah. So we talked about this. I think this was at Portland Jetport, which, by the way, I think is still the best possible name for an airport, a jetport.
It's
no turboprops allowed.
Well,
we don't allow turboprops.
After they renamed Atlanta back to the airport from the spaceport and nail salon.
Intergalactic
Spaceport. Yes, and nail salon. Sorry. After they renamed Atlanta, I think it goes back to Portland.
But apparently, as the report confirms what we already knew, not only did they miss the NOTAMs, but they missed transmitting apparently any of the activities they were doing. But do we have the report to say how many NOTAMs there were? I think they said there were 30. I feel like the number is 37 NOTAMs that they had to sift through, and that they assumed that the runway closure didn't apply during the time they were there. Do you have that up in front of you?
I don't have the number of NOTAMs in front of me. That one is somewhere else in the report, and now I'm going to have to scroll through it, and we're just going to have to put the podcast on hold until one of us can find it and keep scrolling.
Get it?
32.
32. Okay, I was close. That's a lot. Still a lot, but obviously not an excuse for missing something as critical as the runway is closed and missing the situational awareness of all of the other airplanes are doing something else, and all of the other airplanes are communicating over the common radio frequency what they're doing. So lots of questions that still need to be answered about this particular event. And we will await the NTSB's preliminary report, and we will certainly bring this one up again soon.
Indeed. Speaking of Southwest, in California, Southwest is partnering with Archer about developing basically air taxi routes within California. And initially, I thought to myself, well, that's weird. Why would Southwest, of all airlines, be partnering with Archer or really any?
Or any of them. I mean, this is the airline that only realized that passengers want USB ports in their seats like 6 months ago. So jumping from that to an eVTOL is quite the stretch, but here we are. And so the quote that I want to pull out, because this one kind of puts things into context for why Southwest is going down this route. But as part of the announcement, Archer's chief commercial officer said, by putting together Southwest's impressive network of airports in California and their frequent, I'm going to come back to that, frequent intrastate flights with our planned network, Southwest customers could someday complete door-to-door trips like Santa Monica to Napa in less than 3 hours. And I think that's where the interesting thing comes in, is because Southwest is a different airline in California than it is in the rest of the country. It's basically what California's high-speed rail should be, but instead it's airplanes.
Yeah. Frequent departures, I think all major cities, most secondary and tertiary cities, and easy to get on and get off and go about your day.
And maybe it works out there on the West Coast. I mean, here on the East Coast, we can barely get like regular airplanes off the ground without hours worth of delay. But out in the West Coast, where weather's not really a thing for the most part, maybe this makes sense. I don't know.
I think it's interesting that they're trying this in California, because I don't think it would work really anywhere else. The way Southwest's network is structured and the way that eVTOLs are planned to be structured, we don't have any knowledge about how any of this is actually going to work. I think what makes all of these announcements partially speculative, but there's real money behind these, so I think it's worth talking about. I was having a conversation last week with some folks who are working on advanced air mobility or eVTOL regulatory frameworks here in Illinois. And the regulators, I think, are still a bit behind where they need to be. And so I'm really worried about what's going to happen when these companies come up against regulators who are coming up against constituencies. Because we've talked about this before, where the big adoption isn't technology, or the big barriers to adoption isn't going to be technology. It's not going to be, the regulatory framework. It's going to be community opposition. I mean, when people realize that these things make a ton of noise, and to make any sense whatsoever, they're going to have to be able to land in your backyard or a professionally built, place in your backyard.
Yeah, well, they mention right there in the release that these aircraft are quiet compared to a helicopter. That is probably true. I think they call out noise right there in the press release. They say the goal of Archer's aircraft is to offer a safe, low-noise, cost-competitive transportation option with no direct emissions. Forget the no direct emissions part. Forget the safety part, because that's unproven. But the low noise, I mean, comparatively to a 737, yeah, that's true. But compared to nothing, no, that's not true. But there's a balance to be struck.
To say that these aren't coming, I think, would be a misstep. But to say that they're going to be welcomed with open arms, I think is a
mistake. But at the same time, it's just amazing to see an airline like Southwest, who a few short years ago wasn't even technically capable of scheduling a red-eye flight that operated into the following day, now suddenly partnering or having an MOU with an eVTOL outfit is pretty remarkable.
It's a wild world we're living in.
It is wild. So when we say Southwest technologically is so far behind, yeah, but they're catching up slowly but surely. Also, the same airline that couldn't operate in an international flight until a few years ago, until it got new back-end technology. Quite the transformation for Southwest. If they could bring that back to club seating, though, that'd be pretty cool.
Would it?
I mean, if you're a group of 6 people, sure. If not, absolutely not.
That is just so awkward. Hey, I forgot Alaska and Hawaiian Airlines were merging.
It's been very quiet, hasn't it?
I honestly forgot. And when I read the headline, I think it was Seth's bot that flagged the filing that Alaska and Hawaiian have jointly requested transfer of Hawaiian's International Route Network Authority to what will become the parent company of both airlines when the merger closes, so that Hawaiian can keep operating its flights outside the US. I was reminded, but I'm not ashamed to admit I completely forgot that this merger was even in process.
Yeah, mainly because I think there's no one really opposing this merger. Everyone just kind of looks at it and says, yeah, all right, this kind of makes sense, whatever. So if there's not much opposition, you're not going to hear much about it until one of the regulators says yes or no. And I don't think a no is forthcoming. So the less you hear, the better, I think.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah. And at the same time, literally as we record this right now, Alaska just announced an expansion of first class and premium seating, some major increases on the 737-800 from 12 to 16 first class seats, and expansion of premium seats from 24 to 30. Wow, that's a lot, all happening within the next couple of years. So as they are working through their merger with Hawaiian, they are not resting on their laurels with the Alaska side, and they're going heavy for the premium side, which is nice to see. The seats don't look like anything truly remarkable. If you know the Alaska product, this won't seem all that out of the ordinary. But yeah, I think the less you hear about this particular merger, the better.
Yeah. Virgin Atlantic is dropping another one of its long-haul routes to Asia, this time stopping flying to Shanghai. They have been flying to Shanghai for 25 years and are going to be stopping as of October. So pandemic hits, they stop everything. They restarted Shanghai. Virgin decided last year that it wasn't going to restart Hong Kong And that was because of pandemic restrictions and because of Russian airspace restrictions. And now they say that they're going to stop as of the 26th of October, stop flying to Shanghai. So some airlines have been able to make it work. Virgin Atlantic, not one of them.
Yeah. Interestingly, just earlier this year at the end of January, Virgin Atlantic signed a codeshare agreement, I think, with China Eastern to provide service to Shanghai, which is China Eastern's main hub. So maybe that was a part of the plan all along, shift all of that traffic over to China Eastern, and Virgin can pull out of Shanghai and redeploy the fleet elsewhere. I certainly would find myself disappointed, rebooked from a Virgin flight to China Eastern, having flown both of those airlines in the past. But if they're not making money on it, it makes sense to shift that over to a codeshare partner who operating the flight regardless.
There you go. A collection of aviation industry organizations, a large collection of aviation industry organizations in the US, sent a letter this week, yesterday, in fact, to the transportation committees in the US Congress and said, hey, we need more money, and here's how we think you should do it. And by we need more money, they mean airports. So this includes, who doesn't it include? Almost all of the airline pilots associations, the aircraft owners and pilots associations, Airlines for America, which is the airlines trade association, IATA, EAA got involved, the Cargo Airline Association, the Air Traffic Controllers Union, the National Business Aviation Association, Travelers United, which has a little suitcase logo that I particularly enjoy, and a few organizations I had honestly never heard of before. But all organizations saying that the Airport and Airway Trust Fund that is administered by the FAA is the surplus that is going to come about over the next few years, according to CBO projections, is going to need to fund the FAA's Facilities and Equipment Capital Program, which will improve airport infrastructure. And I don't think anyone can argue that there isn't need for improvement across the US in airport infrastructure.
Yeah, it was a pretty stark contrast earlier this summer when I visited one of the German air traffic control facilities out in Bremen, Germany. And it was such a nice facility. The roof wasn't leaking, the elevator worked, the air conditioning was on. They didn't use paper strips to organize aircraft in their control sector. It was wonderful. None of that exists here in the US. We're still using paper strips. We still have, what did the FAA or the independent report say, that if you started replacing every FAA facility now, by the time you're done, you'd still have facilities that are a century old by the time they get replaced.
Mm-hmm.
That's not great. So the call here from a very wide range of concerned entities for increased funding above and the already proposed $8 billion of spending over the next 5 years from the Biden administration, apparently not enough, not nearly enough. So more. Just let's hope that doesn't end up getting tacked on to airline tickets, but it probably will.
So this argues that the money should come from the projected surplus that's going to come out of the, I don't want to get the acronym wrong, the Airport and Airway Trust Fund. So this is already money that's being allocated to this trust fund. And they're saying, why don't we use that surplus that's projected and the amount of money that's already there? We're talking about $18.5 billion through fiscal year 2030 to do some of these projects. We've put NextGen on hold time and time again. There are all sorts of critical safety improvements that haven't been done because of the funding. Only 3 of the 23 facilities evaluated in the FAA's Life Cycle Facility Maintenance and Repair Report could be classified in good condition. I mean, there's so many things that this money could be spent on. So they're saying, let's appropriate that money from this surplus, including folks at the International Council of Air Shows, which I didn't know existed, but that's cool.
How do you get on that council?
I don't know, but I'm absolutely going to find out as soon as we hit stop on the recording.
You should apply.
I think I'm going to have to. Yeah, so there's that. To round out the show, Emirates Sky Cargo says we have more cargo, which means we need more planes, and they want 5 more 777 freighters. And Jason, you have flagged a bit of United fleet planning, which is already in an interesting state, given what we learned at the end of the beginning of the year about how they were expecting to take 100 fewer aircraft now than they had initially planned. What does the new update leave us with?
So on the 787 side, the entire year of 2024, they will take delivery of 4 787s, which is, I'm sure, a lot lower than they would have preferred. But they are taking a surprisingly good number, or planning. Let's not get ahead of ourselves again. They're planning on taking 30 A321neo/neo XLR through the end of this year. A healthy number of 737 MAX, which apparently will all be the 8 and 9, planning on taking 29 of those aircraft. I think it was supposed to be over. Well. I don't want to say any particular number, but at the same time, they're also dramatically reducing the number of A319 and A320 CO aircraft in the fleet, down from 170 to just 157 of those aircraft. So a reduction of 13 of the rather elderly A319, A320 aircraft in United's fleet that are getting a bit long in the tooth. But yeah, some interesting maneuvering at United, but far fewer aircraft from both Airbus and Boeing than originally intended.
Yeah. I will note the important thing for me is that there is no reduction this year in the number of 757s in United States.
Not by choice. I mean, that is something to call out, that they started the year with 61 757s and they'll end the year with 61 757s, not because choice.
They want to. No.
They are supposed to be replacing those with the 737 MAX 10. That is happening who knows when, not in 2024 apparently. So the 757s, the 767s will not be changing, and the 777s will not be changing, much to the dismay of United passengers who have probably found themselves on many a delayed or canceled flights due to elderly aircraft starting to lose it at this point. Particularly the 767 fleet, I think, is getting
What is this, elderly. American Airlines from 10 years ago?
Oh, deep cut. We'll see if any of the United 76s have an engine explode at O'Hare, then you can start making that comparison. That hasn't happened yet.
Don't say things like that. Don't tempt the wrath of the thing high atop of the whatever.
I'm just bringing it back to the top of the podcast.
I appreciate that.
All things begin and end at O'Hare. You know that.
It's one big taxi around the entire airport complex.
The natural order of things.
And on that note, this has been episode 277 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Thanks for listening.